News has come out that certain players in the Toronto Raptors are not happy with their current situation, so we'll discuss that, as well as an addition to the injury report, as Fred VanVleet is once again dealing with some injuries and is questionable for tomorrow's game against the Knicks, and we have an ugly truth about the Toronto Raptors going forward. So lots of stuff to break down in this video. Without further ado, let's dive in the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is certain players, and quote, not happy with the Toronto Raptors, on the Toronto Raptors. So CJ McCollum's a guy that, is a player in the league and came out and did an interview with ESPN the other day. And a part of that interview, part of that long podcast, whatever you want to describe it as, was dedicated to the Toronto Raptors and their current struggles this season. This came out a couple days ago. I saw it on Reddit yesterday. I'll pull up the quote from it. But basically, he did talk about himself for most of the chaptered segment where he was supposed to talk about the Raptors, but went on to say, he dropped a little nugget in there pretty quickly, pretty, nonchalantly, but would definitely be of interest for many Toronto Raptors fans, basically saying that something is going to happen, which seemed more speculative. That's not what we're diving into, but he's saying that there are rumblings that certain players on the team not being happy. And then kind of under his breath said that due to tampering, he can't speak about. K's on Reddit basically summed it up there. I watched the video on it. And basically, CJ McCollum's a guy, people talk around the NBA, and there's one former teammate. There's one guy that CJ McCollum formerly played with who is currently on the Toronto Raptors, and there has been rumblings about him not being currently happy in the situation, especially coming off the bench, and that's the star boy Gary Trent Jr. As they're both teammates in Portland, it seemed like he had a good relationship with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, so the fact that he said due to tampering he can't really dive into that much, a lot of people are speculating that maybe it's Gary Trent Jr. who's the player that, is not currently happy, is not happy with his current situation, is maybe feeding things to his former teammate CJ about, the Toronto Raptors not currently being all sunshine and rainbows. And we have Nick Nurse also talking about how the vibes just seem to be off with this team. He was questioned a bunch of times in one of his interviews, scrums, and basically got angry, got frustrated with the reporters asking so many questions about effort, and he basically resorted to, rather than coaching things, rather than losing, as the discussion, the discourse has sort of been commonly said around by Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, all that sort of stuff, losing, it hurts the effort, all that sort of stuff. But he basically said, I'm done. I'm done with all these effort questions. I'm sick of it. They have accountability on the Toronto Raptors. They have things that they look at. They have measurables. And he's just not happy with it. And he pointed it to more so just the vibes being off, right? Just a direct quote from Nick Nurse, the vibes being off. So that's what our head coach is saying. And now CJ McCollum's coming out indicating that players are not happy on the Toronto Raptors, certain players. So what does this mean for this team heading into this year's trade deadline? Now, I didn't get to react to the Atlanta Hawks game the other night. I didn't get to break down the game. My buddy's leaving Newfoundland, so didn't get to watch the highlights of it formally. But the Raptors were on a 3-game win streak against some of the Portland Trailblazers, who aren't looking too hot right now, and those Charlotte Hornets, who are one of the worst teams in the NBA, back-to-back wins there. But that had some people excited that maybe the Raptors were able to turn it around. But after the game against the Atlanta Hawks, at least from the highlights I watched, it was just an ugly, ugly outing. Yes, we had some positives. I'll discuss those later in this video, but, the fact that we're losing games that bad, and we have guys apparently disgruntled in the locker room or unhappy with their situations. Nick Nurse, the head coach, getting frustrated about all the effort talk and describing how the vibes are just off in the locker room. I don't care what you think about the talent of the Toronto Raptors, because frankly, I think we got a lot of good players on this team, a lot of talent on the squad, but it's currently not fitting together. It's not gelling. Whenever we play a semi-decent team, we've been getting slapped, at least for the last month and a half, and something needs to change. Something needs to get adjusted. And CJ McCollum in that interview sort of went on to say that, and his partner he was doing the podcast with basically went on to say that they don't expect anything crazy to go down, but minor moves definitely just have to be made. We need something switched up with this current roster, with this current formula, because it's not looking too hot right now. If we have players disgruntled, right, this isn't something the Toronto Raptors have really dealt with. People frustrating the locker room. Sure, we've had Kawhi Leonard, who didn't really want to come here, and we won a championship with that, but rarely did we get leaks about players, being frustrated in the locker room, all this sort of stuff that has been coming out over the course of the season. So, I've booked it. I've locked it in. I think a trade is going to be coming. I think a deal is going to end up being moved, come this trade deadline, regardless of what it is. I mean, I'll throw my predictions up there on the board. I don't think it's going to be Pascal Siakam or Fred VanVleet traded. So OG and Gary are really the two guys that are on the front, at least from my prediction front, about potentially going down. But a lot of people have a lot of things to say. So leave in your comments down below what you think will happen. And if you're very confident in your predictions, you guys can head over to CoolBet and you can straight up make predictions in terms of the top 4 Toronto Raptors. The odds are there on what teams they're going to be playing for following this year's trade deadline. And there's some interesting bets. You can obviously bet for them remaining on the Toronto Raptors, or OG Anunoby going to the Knicks, Fred VanVleet going to the Magic, or I guess whatever team you really want. But you can check out the CoolBet app if you're interested in betting on those. CoolBet's the best sports book in Canada. They're regulated in Ontario. They're available all across the country. And if you use our link down below, you get some boosted odds joining the CoolBetters Discord and the Raptors Digest. So definitely check out their app. But it's definitely going to be some madness for the Toronto Raptors over the next couple of weeks, so we'll see what ends up happening. But the next thing we're discussing, next thing we're taking a look at in this video is Fred VanVleet being injured. Now, this has become a meme on this, at least in the comment section of our channels and the live chats and stuff, and it's whenever Fred VanVleet drops a dud, which he most definitely did. There's no other way to describe his game. The other night, he went 1 for 9 from the field on Saturday, and is to lower his NBA worst field goal percentage to 73.70. Goodness gracious, I wish he was shooting 70%, 37.3%. Right? Had an ugly outing, but it's a meme how when Fred VanVleet has a bad game, it always comes out that he's dealing with a minor injury. And now, according to Doug Smith, that lower back soreness lands Fred VanVleet on the questionable list for the Raptors at the Knicks at New York on Monday afternoon. So, Fred VanVleet is dealing with injuries. He's dealing with pain throughout the course of this season. A part of that's due to the heavy load he's been carrying. You got benched, him and Gary, in the Atlanta Hawks game, from what I've been told from people are saying. So, watching the highlights of the game, I don't know. But Fred VanVleet, injured or not, if he's injured, if he's dealing with something serious, sit him. Don't have him go out there and stink up the court, right? We don't need that. We don't need him aggravating back injuries to go out there and not provide that much value. Still on the boat. I'm still in the camp that Fred VanVleet is not a horrible basketball player. I know I get roasted in the comments, get called a homer for saying that, but I think Fred VanVleet can provide some value for this team. But when he's hurt, when he's playing like this, it's just not helping out anybody. Fred VanVleet's rep, his trade value if you want to give him up, and it's not helping the Raptors on the court. So if he's dealing with injuries, Toronto, Masai Ujiri, whoever the heck makes the Nick Nurse, whoever makes the decisions about who ends up playing and who doesn't, sit the man. Sit him. I don't know. Just wanted to make I'm in my Raptors therapy mode right now. We probably should have did this live, chat with you guys, but it's an ugly situation out there for the Toronto Raptors right now. But let's dive into the next topic of discussion. And the next thing we're taking a look at is an ugly truth for the Toronto Raptors. And the ugly truth is that the Toronto Raptors have a really tough go ahead of them. We had our pretty easy stretch. We had our homestand, which wasn't too hot for Toronto. We did get that little win streak, against the Blazers and the Hornets, but there's questions about whether or not the Toronto Raptors could carry that 3-game win streak, the momentum, and get themselves some W's over this weekend, at least against the Atlanta Hawks, who haven't been that great themselves this season. But the Toronto Raptors ended up taking the L to Atlanta, and we are going on the road for a lot of games going forward, and we're playing some pretty good teams. I mean, the Knicks have been good this season, playing the Bucks, the Timberwolves, the Celtics, the Knicks again, the Kings, the Warriors, the Blazers, who we did beat, so maybe that's a doable game, but they've dealt with some injuries. Maybe guys will be back at that point. The Suns, the Jazz, the Rockets, and the Grizzlies. The Jazz, the Suns, especially if Devin Booker's not there, can get some wins. But again, those are on the road, right out in the Western Conference. Those are going to be some brutal, brutal games for the Toronto Raptors to try and win out here. And these are all big games, right? Where does this stretch of games lead us to, right? February 5th. These are all the games that we have before this year's trade deadline. So if we're losing more outings, if we can't get some wins on this streak, expect fireworks to happen, because I don't see how the Toronto Raptors can avoid making even big, substantial moves if we go on another big losing streak, which could definitely be the case given our schedule coming up. So I don't know. Let me know in the comment section how you're feeling about that. But the final thing we're discussing in this video, because it's been a downer. It's been a downer video in this one. A couple positives about the team. Scotty Barnes had a remarkable performance against the Atlanta Hawks. So shout out to Scotty Barnes. Give the reins to him if we're losing, right? I want to see Scotty Barnes develop, get in the, superstar mold, get his game rocking, try to practice some things, work out the kinks he's had in his second-year slump. So that was a positive. And Precious Achiuwa, he has been looking good. He's putting up some solid stats. Him and Chris Boucher have at least been providing something off the bench. Now, people have also speculated whether or not Chris Boucher could be traded at this year's deadline. Who really knows? But it's nice to see a couple guys off the bench performing out there in their minutes. So a couple of positives there to end off the video. But folks, you guys are the best for making this far. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Download the CoolBet app if you're interested in making bets on the sports, whether it be Raptors games or some Raptors trades. But you guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.